good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our fiscal year 2024 Bidders Conference. We're excited to be able to utilize these funds for our various community programs for the upcoming 2-year contract cycle, and this Bidders Conference is an important part of that. So I'm not sure if any of you saw our legal notices or just got, word of mouth, but thank you for coming. So I guess we'll begin with why we're all here today, right? So the Older Americans Act of 1965 was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson and signed into law, and is broken down within program instruction and information memorandum, stuff that none of you need to know, but it's helpful to give the historical context of why we're here. The last time that the Older Americans Act was recertified was in 2020, as it does every so often by Congress, and that's how the funds are appropriated so that we can receive these and give them out to all of you fine folks. So the primary reason is for Title III B and E programs. So Title III B is for elders above the age of 60, and Title III E is for caregivers above the age of 55, taking care of an elder above the age of 60. I'm going to ask if everyone can hold questions till the end, just in case I answer it within my presentation. Just wanted to also introduce one of our Title III Review Committee members who are present today. Eric Poulin is good to see you. He is the Council on Aging Director over in Rochester. We also have Don Blake Souza, Maria Connor of Dartmouth, and Kathleen Medeiros, who is part of Coastline staff. So we have 2 members of our board, 2 of our advisory, and 1 staff member, as the Older Americans Act compels us to do. So a little history on why Coastline's here today. So we were founded in 1977, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. In addition to being an area agency on aging, we're also an aging services access point. And that's just a lot of words to say we receive both federal and state funds so we can provide programs and services to elders and caregivers within our service area, which we currently have New Bedford, Dartmouth, Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, Marion, Rochester, and Gosnold. So hopefully the programs that you're all here hoping to receive funding for fall within that service area. So, and something that not a lot of people are actually aware of is that Coastline is actually an acronym. It stands for Care of All Seniors to Live Independently, Naturally, and Effectively, which I think it really brings us back to our mission statement to be a trusted provider of these resources and programs, as we have been since 1977 and when we became an area agency on aging in 1980. We're part of one of 600 area agencies on aging nationally and about 24 statewide, to give you a context of the framework of the aging network. And basically all of that to say we're just doing our best to help seniors age at home in the community with dignity and respect. So the primary basis of how we appropriate these funds within the Title III Committee is foundational to the needs assessment survey that was conducted in 2020, along with the area plan, which goes from 2022 to 2025. And that goes over a lot of our the needs that have been identified through surveys, focus groups, etc. So we'll get to that in a moment, but I think I can just start it off with the actual request for proposal. So I hope some of y'all have had the time to take a look at it. Cover page is pretty self-explanatory. We do require that each of our sub-grantee agencies are equal opportunity and affirmative action employers, and display as such on your documents. So the table of contents, legal notices, hopefully you saw those in the newspapers, if anyone actually reads those or that section. So getting into the introduction, I already covered our service area, what Coastline is as an agency, and why we're all here today. So Title III is part of the Older Americans Act, and it's basically to develop these services and funding. So for Title IIIC, which we're not here for the RFP Bidders Conference today, but that's our nutrition program. So to give you an idea of the context of how these funds are divvied out, And the funding level is contingent upon the funding that we receive from Elder Affairs. And say, for instance, the government shuts down next week, within the contract there is a stipulation where if we're not receiving the money and funding, we are unable to do so and give it out to our sub-grantees. Information and assistance: if anyone has any questions, we are compelled to assist in any way we can within reason. So my contact information is also listed there, along with a couple helpful definitions of the greatest social need and greatest economic need, which we try to prioritize in our work and distribution of funding. Monitoring and evaluation: every single sub-grantee will receive an evaluation annually. I know some folks in the audience who are already Title III recipients understand, but basically we just go through what is laid out within the contract to make sure that you're all abiding by our agreement, right, in order to continue receiving funds. So the selection criteria, again, that is the 5-person committee that I just described, and once we all meet and review the applications, we'll have a couple weeks, come back together and provide some funding recommendations, to which our board of directors and advisory council will pass, and then we will move on to the contract procurement, and if need be, a revision of the actual application, whether it be a budget if you're not getting as much, or you're getting more. So there's always that possibility as well. Handicap accessibility: we require all of the venues that your agencies are hosted at be handicap accessible. Coordination of services: we encourage every sub-grantee to coordinate with other agencies and organizations within our service area so that we're not duplicating services and that we're able to more effectively provide our programs and services to our consumers. Reference on funded publications: everyone likes a little bit of credit, so on all of the handouts regarding your program, if you could kindly recognize both Coastline Elderly Services and the Executive Office of Elder Affairs. Policies and procedures for voluntary contributions: that is a key word. Whenever there is a donation, the word voluntary always needs to precede it due to federal law. All of these things that I'm discussing today are based out of the Code of Federal Regulations, the Older Americans Act, Massachusetts General Law, etc. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but if anyone has any questions about a specific law, I'm more than happy to answer that at the end of the meeting. The planning and service area: all of our proposed projects must fall within our communities. The more communities that you serve actively, the better. And then to the timeline. So as I discussed earlier, the request for proposal was published on the 2nd and 5th of this month in the Standard Times, and many of you, I'm sure, have received an email notifying you that this 2-year contract RFP is up for grabs now. So that brings us to the bidders conference, which is today, of course, and 1 month from today at 3 p.m. The applications will be due for all grantees, whether you're a prior year grantee or you're a new grantee. All the deadlines are still the same. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to approach me about the timeline afterwards. And then the Title III Review Committee will meet to review applications for 2 weeks. At which point, once we've got our recommendations, we'll bring it to the board and advisory council and get the funding decision, and then we'll draft up the notification of grant awards, or NGA. And then once that's all copacetic, we will sign it and begin the new federal fiscal year on October 1st, which will then end on September 30th, 2024, if you could believe it, and then the following contract year, which is going to be 10/1/24 to September 30th, 25. And then we get to the actual application. Pretty self-explanatory here. SOMBA is the State Office of Minority and Women Business Alliance. If your agency is one of those, you would likely know that. It is definitely something that not only Coastline, but Elder Affairs loves to see that partnership. So One thing that's a common misconception is that not all of our contracted services under Title III need to be nonprofit. There are plenty of exceptions where a for-profit institution would be able to receive funding so long as that service is free to elders. And your federal ID and DUNS number, the amount of funding you're requesting, the number of years that you've been receiving Title III funds, and the communities that you anticipate to be served. And in order to, I guess, quell expectations a little bit, the amount of funding, just due to the systemic nature of Congress, not appropriating enough funding for our Title III programs and some of our services. Basically, we've received flat funding for the better part of the last decade, and therefore, with inflation, it might feel like you're receiving less funds even if you're receiving the same or more. So we're all in this boat together, unfortunately. Okay. So moving on, the agency description, the description of the program that you are applying to receiving funding for. The need, this is basically your logical and methodological argument for why you would like to receive funding based on the community need as you've seen it, or how it relates within our needs assessment survey and area plan. Eligibility criteria, all elders above the age of 60 for Title IIIB again, and caregivers 55 and older. Action plan and work steps, when you'll be doing the objectives to reach your goal, over what time frame. Not every program is going to run every single month due to the nature of some of them, but the more coverage that you have while you're receiving funding, the better the application looks. The program outcomes, the listed expectation of how this will benefit your consumers based off of the community need. The outreach and publicity to the targeted population, and the, of course, inclusion of Coastline and Elder Affairs. Confidentiality and HIPAA, basically just doing your best within the guidelines to protect the confidentiality and privacy of your consumers. Evaluation and monitoring, again, every year, each grantee will receive an evaluation. Typically, when we have a new grantee that hasn't received funding before, we'll do an initial site visit to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of the terms of agreement within the contract and the receipt of monies. The voluntary donation policy, again, I won't beat a dead horse, but donation needs to include voluntary. Future funding, we certainly love to see when our sub-grantees go out and try to get and secure more funding for their consumers for both your programs and the Title III funding program that you're applying for. Disaster preparedness, self-explanatory. CORI background checks. Any staff whose salaries are covered by Title III services need to have CORI background checks. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, but just would like to highlight that as we do request at least a blank form of the CORI check during our evaluation process. The staffing of the program would need a job description of each staff member whose funding would be received by Title III. License and accreditation, any relevant positions that would require a license, we need to make sure that you are qualified to do so. And then the budget instructions. So for Title IIIB, you have 15% as a match, and for Title IIIE, you have 25% as a match. Travel, as most recently updated, I believe some of the information out there went to, I believe, 59 cents, but it was recently raised to 65 cents a mile. No grantee can reimburse their drivers above that rate, but you can reimburse below, but we certainly like to see our drivers be properly compensated.